Erica, is Richard here, right on your right,
Hello.
and Sherry on your left?
I'm with the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority.
Nice to meet you.
So glad
Church
you
and
connected.
I'm a representative
Yeah.
of the city of Boston.
Hi. Oh, from the city. I live in the city, so.
Yeah, the Boston
I
is
drove-
development authority.
I'm with, yes, I work in Cambridge, but I live in Boston. I work for the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority.
Yes, I heard you say that. But I take care of people who live in Boston and both. We're in Boston.
Honor of our position together.
Oh, cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The answer to your question is I'm currently obsessed with machine building,
Yeah.
and we've been playing with a really interesting architecture.
Oh, Sherry, just to say thank you.
Thank you.
I want a version of how to make anything happening. Architect.
Mm.
I don't know, yeah. Challenge for memory. Okay, do you guys need anything printed out at all?
War and Peace.
Yeah, right, why not, huh? Give me the golden braid.
Guys, this is awesome, thank you.
Oh, you're
I will wear this.
So,
Yeah.
Lars,
Yes, sir.
the Fab Academy has grown to lots of sites. It spawned Fabric Academy, which spawned Bio Academy, which spawned Agri Academy. We're all teaching through this distributed network. And then a new thing we're starting to do is Fab Academy instructors have gone through the global cycle, teaching local versions in local time zones, but with the same sort of global evaluation. And so there's a whole tree of classes emerging. It would be great. And we find they're much more important than I thought for, obviously, students, but one is sharing and propagating best practices, and one is building global collaborating cohorts. And they've been really important for both.
Are there any, like if I went to the websites for these different little stories captured about the collaboration and impact?
Great question. We're getting better. So,
Okay.
so the starting point is Luciana in Barcelona. Is the coordinator of all of this.
No.
We have so many stories of
I am
life-changing
This
experiences.
is not my expertise, but there's
Of,
projects
you
we're
know, one is
working on
people
that-
just saying, this changed my life, I'm in a new career,
Mhm,
something I ever
mhm.
did.
Still learning.
But start like, there was a woman from Panama originally who took this and then, Nike cold called her and said, we saw your work, can we hire you? And, you know, lots of stories like that.
You guys, just let me know when you want to let people in, because there's someone in the waiting room.
We're almost ready. Sherry, are you expecting Somerville?
Yes.
Can I make a personal connection? This is like so funny. Alana, I went to Habanim Zor Mosheva with Hadar. So when I saw your name, I recognized you from all his like beautiful Facebook posts about you, and I thought, oh, how fun! I'll get to meet you.
Hi. Tell me your name. I
Cool.
haven't heard it yet.
Erica
Thanks.
Schwartz.
That's exactly what I wanted.
Nice to meet you, Erica.
Needs to be
Tell him I
personal.
say hi.
So,
I will.
if-
He's right outside the door.
If everything stays stable, I think we're okay with this because calling out did work.
Okay.
But what you found was exactly what I wanted when this wasn't working. So if you leave it there as a backup, but thank you, that's perfect and you've been very helpful.
You guys just let me know when you want to let people in.
Give it just a minute or two more.
Yep, just tell me when and I'll do it.
Let me finish my brownie.
Yep. I'm just gonna go check on this line.
Maybe you can squeeze in a couple of deep breaths, Sherry, before we go down. Sherry, could you let me in the Zoom when you get a chance? I just want to be on the chat.
Hey, Kate, how did it go? I didn't get to hear everything this morning. How did it go? Yeah?
On the record.
Yeah, it was nice, thanks.
I don't know if I'm comfortable with stuff. I'm like, I don't know.
Recording in progress.
So Lars, you need to turn off your mic, your speaker.
There we go.
Yeah, it's gone.
I don't know where this will.
Sorry, Alana. And sure, Sherry, why don't you-
Yeah, just please make sure to mute things.
Yeah, it's it's, interestingly enough, it's not the microphone side, it's the speaker side.
Yeah, you gotta turn off the speaker and the mic.
Sherry, let me do something. Yeah, I want to.
And just for whomever is running tech, I can't share screen yet, so someone's gonna have to promote me to share screen eventually. So I don't need it yet, but eventually I will.
Can you do that from there, Neil? Yeah.
Make me a co-host.
Up in the chat, but I can't. Okay, so this chat, you can see there.
Oh, hey, Leah. How are you?
All right, good. Let's see, I can't make Alana a co-host from here.
Can you?
So yeah, we can do that. I'm gonna make that go away.
Somebody just made me a co-host. I'm good now. Whoever did it, thank you.
Yay! This is very, you got a short, don't we?
I'm good.
Okay, we can see and hear everyone. But we wanted the chat open, so we can see it while it's running.
Can you test this?
Oh, it's turned on. I see the light now. Yeah, she couldn't turn it on.
I think it was unplugged.
Oh, okay.
Short.
Hello?
Hello? Can you guys hear Richard?
Richard, down here at the far end of the table? Yeah. I see the thumbs
Excellent.
up. Great.
My speaker.
And then, if this is a quorum, we should start. Rebecca, can you start recording?
Can you let people know?
Recording is on.
Yep.
Okay, good.
We're expecting Oye and a couple others, but I guess they'll just trickle in.
Did you have any issues coming up, or did you guys do? I used to work there, so I just have it.
Oh, but do we need help, do we need to get people in who can't get through the?
Luciano's out there, letting people in.
Okay. And then Rebecca, you can monitor the waiting room?
Yep.
Okay, then I think we can start.
Yeah, I can't take it off.
Welcome to CIC Core.
Erica Hadar says hi.
Great.
All right, well, should we sort of get started? I mean, we're missing 2 or 3 people, but they'll probably trickle in, so. Well, everybody, thank you for being here today. Thank you for coming. This workshop is really designed to get the Fab City Somerville, Boston, Cambridge initiative really reignited, right? So back in 2015, I think it was, all 3 cities signed up to be a Fab City, which you'll learn more about in just a moment. And I don't think it was quite the right time. You know, we just didn't get the momentum that we had hoped for. And so now over the last 5, 6 years, there's a lot of momentum. We've got 38 cities that are signed up, including Paris, Barcelona, Amsterdam, you know, and many others. And some of them are getting tremendous traction. And so we thought it was the right time to kind of, you know, reignite this. And so the goal is not only to ignite it, but to really think about urban fabrication and innovation, right? Digital fabrication and innovation here, about sustainable manufacturing, and about what that looks like now and in the future. And how do we enable a city to produce what it consumes? You know, what do we need at policy level? What do we need at every level, really? And so, you know, it's a multi-stakeholder process, and so the people here today are from government, from private sector, from the maker movement, and so I think it will take this kind of a village to move this forward, but that's why we brought you here today. So the workshop today is going to be in 3 parts. We will start with Professor Gershenfeld and Kate Armstrong, who will kind of situate you to what this whole Fab City and Fab Lab kind of initiative is and what local manufacturing is. And then Kate, who is one of the managing directors of the Fab City Foundation, she's going to kind of give us a real orientation as to what Fab City means and what that is. And then Alana, who is here today, is really going to talk about her experience with, you know, with how do you reignite local manufacturing, right? How do you revitalize local manufacturing? And so we're trying to use a fishbowl approach, which I am not really familiar with. I think Alana and Lars are more familiar with the fishbowl approach, but we're also in this funny hybrid environment, so we'll see how that works. And we want to think, if we can, we want to kind of think about the funding that's coming out right now, whether it's you know from ARPA or from the federal government. You know, there are a lot of dollars coming out right now. Is there a way that we could leverage, you know, what we're doing and those dollars to move this initiative forward? And you know, and how do we do this in an inclusive and equitable way, right? So thinking about all those things. So to start then, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Neil. Yeah, maybe, would you like me to introduce you, or do you want to introduce yourself? Well, Neil is the director of the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT, and they look at the boundary between the physical atoms of the world and the digital bits of the world, and it's a beautiful initiative. This group started the Global Fab Lab program. And Fab Labs, we're about 2,000 labs in 125 countries now. And if you add that to maker spaces and hacker spaces and, you know, all of those kinds of prototyping facilities, you're talking about thousands and thousands of infrastructure, a sort of an accidental or serendipitous infrastructure around the world. So at any rate, with that, Neil, I would like to turn it over to you to kind of situate us.
Thanks, Sherry. And given the split geometry, I'm going to talk to the camera, but I'll see people in the room via the camera, via the screen, to not look in 2 places. So yeah, I direct Center for Bits and Atoms. We do research on digital meets physical, so things like the first faster than classical quantum computers, and we're part of creating Internet of Things or synthetic life. But we run an unusual facility of one of every tool to make anything, and that led to one of the most oversubscribed classes at MIT, how to make almost anything, and the demand for that, for NSF outreach, led to Fab Labs. And the first one was with Mel King in Boston with Sherry and colleagues, and they've been doubling every year and a half since, and so there's now about 2,000 in 125 countries. And so from CBA, we're very involved in the research roadmap behind them, and then through the Fab Foundation that Sherry leads, we're building the operational capacity to scale the network. And so just some of the highlights in the Fab Lab network, they're used to incubate businesses, create infrastructure, do outreach. You know, they were at the beginning of what became the maker movement. They've spawned legislation right now in the House and the Senate for a national Fab Lab network as a national initiative, as a new kind of right of universal access to digital fabrication. We spun off, inspired by the MIT class, a Fab Academy, but instead of 100 students at MIT, it taught to 100 labs around the world, each with work groups of students. That then spawned Fab Academy to teach textile technologies, a Bio Academy with colleague George Church from Harvard lead to teach biotechnology. There's an emerging and Agri Academy to teach agricultural technologies, so distributed education over the network. And so then as this grew, there was a really strong cluster in Barcelona, and it led up to, in the global meeting we hosted in Barcelona, Barcelona has fabulous design sense and over 50% youth unemployment. A whole generation can't work. And so colleagues there started deploying Fab Labs as part of urban infrastructure. And then that led to a really exciting moment at the Fab 10 meeting in Barcelona, where the then mayor at the time, Trias, pressed a button to start a 40-year countdown to roughly urban self-sufficiency, to Barcelona producing what it consumes. And the vision for it was going from a smart city to a Fab City. And one way we summarized it then is Barcelona at the time took products in and sent trash out. What they wanted is data to come and go, the bits to come and go, but the atoms to stay. Another way to view it is Barcelona was based on consumption. They wanted to pivot it to being based on creation. Another way to view it was urban infrastructure. The city provides electricity or clean water. This is now viewing the means to make as part of infrastructure in the city. And so that started the Barcelona challenge, the countdown for 40 years to be able to make almost anything in the city. And crucially, that countdown isn't a step function. The idea is not that we work for 40 years and then we roll it out, but a few percent a year we take over part of what is globally sourced to be locally produced. And so to meet that challenge, it contains two really large challenges. So one challenge is measurement. To meet the challenge, you need to know the fluxes of what comes into the city and what goes out to the city. And we've since found almost no city has that data. So what are the bits coming and going and what are the atoms coming and going to measure progress towards the challenge. And then the other crucial thing you need is the technology base. Kate will talk more about the full stack to realize the Fab City vision, but it all rests at the base on the means of production. And so there are fabulous examples to inspire this. During the pandemic, there was this big gulf between do-it-yourself projects and mass manufacturing. In a coordinated way, networks of labs stepped in, initially for PPE and medical supplies, to fill a gap in broken supply chains. Fab labs all around the world make furniture, but they've gone all the way up from tiny houses to full-size houses. One of the early inspirations was Barcelona won the People's Choice in the European Solar Decathlon, making a complete solar house based out of the lab. Fab labs make energy. There are projects making small-scale wind turbines, PV arrays, recycling and upcycling, making machines to take recycled materials and grind them and process them and turn them into new materials. Data networks, urban infrastructure, making citywide wireless networks. Everything I'm describing isn't a projection. Each of these are working projects with compelling examples of what you can do in the lab. One of the most interesting things you can make in the lab is machines. And so labs making maker spaces, rapid prototyping. And one of the most interesting things of all is people. I described the range of classes, and Sherry's leading a project called Scopes DF that's doing this for K-12 and for teachers, taking bright inventive people and giving them alternate career pathways. And so all of that's possible, and that's the kind of technology base for meeting the Fab City commitment. But each of those are examples. They all need measurement to characterize them. For example, how the urban agriculture relates to the efficiency in resource consumption of other kinds of agriculture, and they all need work on scaling them. And so even if you have the tools in the lab, a great deal of work needs to happen to develop and deploy these technologies. And so one of the things emerging that's very encouraging is larger scale hubs. And so joined by Boston, Somerville, and Cambridge in Boston, Artisans Asylum is developing a really interesting complex in Alston. We were just at Cambridge Public Library yesterday. There are a lot of very sad maker spaces in libraries. This was a happy one that reflected a lot of experience. And we're getting close to a really interesting Somerville collaboration where we're looking at creating both a global home as a community resource for the Fab Foundation, and in particular, creating a really substantial Fab Cities technology hub, a place to build urban agriculture and deploy machines making machines and test wind turbines. And as each of these are developed, they can be deployed throughout the network, but tremendous work needs to be done just in building up this technology pipeline. And so one of the really interesting things emerging in this Fab City network is a network of technology hubs for the enabling Fab City technology. And so at this stage in its life, the Fab City initiative has been really successful at capturing the imagination of cities from leadership to grassroots. It's been pretty good at capturing funding to support it, although more is needed. At this stage in its life, it's just beginning to tackle the measurement of how you evaluate progress and how cities stay on it, and just beginning to transition from the technology demonstrations to really scaling and deploying the technologies for impact. Now, all of that doesn't have to be done in one go. That's a 40-year agenda, but each year we need to tackle a few % more of that. So that's where we are today. Kate, take over.
Yeah, well, let me just say, hello, Kate. And I'm going to ask everybody in the room to introduce themselves, both virtually and here, right after Kate talks, because we've just got started so quickly. But Kate is, as I said, she is one of the managing directors for the Fab City Foundation. She's actually originally from New Zealand, not New Zealand, Australia, right? And she's done a lot of community work in Australia and in the Netherlands, and of course now in Barcelona and around the world. But she also is sort of the communication lead at our Anchor Fab Lab in Barcelona, the Fab Lab Barcelona, which is a real design center for the community. And so, Kate, with that, please situate us.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Neil. You can hear me clearly? Great.
Yes.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here. And it's funny because I was, I think last year, well, not last year, year before, the last year that we were able to be real physical people, actually in Boston, and I met some of you. So it's great to see some of you back online and doing this kind of reignition, which is really great. I'm really enjoying it. Also on another side, I'm super happy to see Claire in the Zoom room because it's not very often we get two Aussies doing Fab City together. So this is great to see, and welcome from the other side of the world, the other time zone as well, keep in mind. Yeah, so I was going to just share my screen quickly to give you an overview of what this crazy, what this crazy thing is that you're becoming a part of, and you're really trying to reignite there in your world. So I'm going to share my screen. I don't need to say that because we're not live, but here we go. Oh, can I share my screen? Rebecca? Sorry, it says I can do it, but I can't, which is funny. Let's see. If not, I can share. Awesome. Yeah.
Try again.
Super. Here we go. Okay, so presentation. Yeah, so the aim is to situate you basically inside this vision. As Neil was saying, the logic of the Fab Labs and the logic of this bits to atoms that is being worked on by CBS is kind of what drives the overall Fab City agenda. We're really interested in how you can scale this idea to a city in order to benefit the systems that we participate in and are also the participants of. In that we have, the natural systems, but also those systems that have been created in the industrial paradigm, so production and consumption systems. So we want to kind of understand, and we're working on a 40-year roadmap, as Neil was saying, to move from PITO, which is product in, trash out, towards DITO, which is data in, data out. And more specifically, we're working towards understanding what that actually gives us in terms of capacity as localized, situated communities. So what that gives us is the capacity to focus on our region, our bioregion and within, to understand how we can have material circularity, collaboration, and of course, very importantly, production in all its very many forms. So the Fab City Global Initiative right now, when it started way back when. It kicked off in Barcelona, as Neil was saying. It was an idea, and it was kind of this concept. And over the last few years, in my time, I've been with the organization 4 years, we've been able to scale it to something that looks like this. So we have a global network of cities, and this also includes regions, countries, and settlements. We have a global collective, and we have a foundation. So the network, we'll talk about this more specifically throughout the presentation, but just to touch on the two other sides of this, we have the collective, which is individuals. So this is where we see people who are working and already working on FabCity concepts and ideas within their work, and they kind of contribute to the overall vision of how FabCity is working globally. And then we have the foundation, which we set up in 2020, but it's been something that we've been working towards for quite a while to really understand how we can create an agile framework to kind of support the global initiative in all of its work. And we're really pleased and really proud, actually, that this year we've brought on over 10 people to work with us. And we've been able to use a model and a framework which comes out of Estonia, which is this digital foundation. So basically it's a location independent foundation. So we kind of hacked and understood that system in order to be an agile framework for our global initiative. So to move now to talk about the network. So in the room right now, we have some citizen representatives and others from 3 of our prior 38 cities. And the other cities are dotted all over the world with a real kind of focus in Europe and in the Americas. Shout out to Claire, we're still missing one in Australia. We have interest from Hobart and also I hope Lake Macquarie. And of course, today we also invited 3 new members, which brings us to 41 in total, which is really exciting because, you know, these years that we've just been living have been really challenging. And for 3 cities, including Montreal, Montpellier, and Verderbord, to come into the network is a really great achievement, and we're really happy to welcome them. So all of these cities work in their own capacity and their own situated approach to rescale and relocalize production. So this means that each of these cities is not doing what the other is doing, but they're taking the ideas and the logic of moving data, not atoms, and understanding how that can benefit their local ecosystem, including their communities, including their cities, and including their manufacturers as an economic capacity as well. So when we talk about this, we're really looking at how we can do this on a multi-scalar approach and how we can connect different levels of effort in order to produce really localized, situated responses that then can connect to other knowledge networks globally. One of those knowledge networks, of course, being the network of cities itself. So there's a couple of ways to think about this. This is one of our more, I would say, avant-garde approaches to talking about what and trying to look at what this means. How we kind of linked these ideas of the Fab Lab and its domestic approach to fabrication to how we kind of create a social field around that, how that engages the material flow of a city, and how that then connects to a bioregional approach for a city. So this approach and this one that I talked about first, basically, this is the overall framework. And what we've been looking at quite recently is something we call the full stack, or a strategic action plan. The idea of the strategic action plan is to create a framework so that those cities who are looking to implement the ideas and the logic of a Fab City, of the Pito to Dito model, can have an idea of the potential ways in which this can be done. So it's important to recognize that this is to provide a framework for cities to understand how the different layers may interconnect, how social, how domestic scale production, how, for example, territorial strategies are all part of this. This is not something that happens in one place at one time. It happens really as a movement across different layers of a city, a region, and of course, globally. So this strategic action plan, Tomas actually has a talk on this tomorrow morning, our time. So if anyone is interested, please jump onto the live.fablabs.io and check it out, because I think it will be really interesting for anyone who's entering the network and is looking for some inspiration. So the idea of this, basically, what I'd like to do is just talk about a few ways in which other cities are approaching this and some trends that we see moving in the network around these levels. So I wanted to start with the one that Neil had been mentioning, which is the idea of the distributed infrastructure. This is indeed the basis of, everything that we do inside the FabCity network. And it's not only the basis in terms of the machines that we see here on the left, but it's also the basis in terms of how we think about the potential of ourselves as producers, not just consumers. So the Fab Lab space becomes a really integral part of developing the capacity of people, but also the culture around which we gather to share knowledge, to organize, and to create this movement that happens at different scales of the city. There are some examples coming from our network cities. So this is from Sao Paulo, who have set up a network of these Fab Labs across the city in order to kind of pinpoint hotspots in which they can bring communities together and bring this educational benefit that comes in a Fab Lab. Another of this one is the global network. We know this one. The idea of this is this: if this happens at every scale and every city within the network, we end up with this one, which we know, which is this global community of Fab Labs becoming an infrastructure across the globe. And an infrastructure not only in terms of machines, but as I said, in terms of how we can really create a new generation of people who are going to move forward with these ideas. So next I want to talk about a few levels up. A few levels up, we find one of the levels, which is called developing shared urban and territorial strategies. Why I want to bring attention to this level of the stack is because it's really where the network cities shine. So this is really where the network cities are looking and mapping and understanding the existing initiatives that are happening in their cities and understanding how they could be and should be connected through the ideas of Fab City. So this is specifically important, I think, in the case of your three kind of cities coming together as a mini region, because this is what you're starting today. You're really starting to understand who's in the room, who is available to you to become part of an ecosystem that can produce and locally across a fabric in the city. So this is the example from Fab City Barcelona. Of course, we have the Fab Lab, really integral to this. We have what we have in Barcelona, which are public Fab Labs. These are also very integral to this. But you also see we have different kinds of actors, ones that are involved in zero-kilometer strategies, ones that are involved in arts and research, for example, others that are involved in feeding people, restaurants and organizations around urban farming, for example. Another approach to this, which we see in Seoul, is really around the production capacity. So in Barcelona, we're looking at something that is a little bit more like a neighborhood mapping of who is involved from different kinds of organizations. In Seoul, we see this happening really in the production capacity of that city. So what are those productive capacities of the city in terms of what are they manufacturing, what level and scale of manufacturing can they be, and how can you create this kind of flexible factory approach across the city? Finally, I wanted to bring the example in Puebla, in Mexico, who took a similar approach, but in a really scaled down version in one district. So really looked at one area that they've represented it basically around the idea of local crafts. So local crafts not only as something that brings people together, but local crafts is something that can boost economic wellness, it can boost entrepreneurship in the city, and it can also be a vehicle for education and development around So when our cities join the network, we encourage them to do this kind of mapping. And I think that this is something that can be very beneficial for cities to understand, yeah, who's in the room and who's willing to work on this and make this happen. And I think one of the most interesting things is that not only is it very specific to each city in which it happens, but each city kind of uncovers people that they weren't really aware of in their city and really understand that, oh, okay, that's interesting. We have some different kinds of partnerships we weren't aware of happening. So finally, I just want to cover from our perspective in the foundation, some kind of emerging trends that I think are interesting to keep on your radar in terms of how our cities are working and how our cities are kind of looking at the idea of Fab City. The first one is public-private partnerships. So I think that this one is a really, really hot topic. We're seeing a lot of interest coming from public interest, which we have always had. It is something that is part of becoming part of the network. You have to have a mayor pledge. But we're having this really interesting moment in which the consortiums being developed in the Fab cities are actually developing novel approaches to public-private partnerships. And one way this is happening, as Neil mentioned earlier, is through the Fab City hubs. So this is an interesting kind of manifestation of the idea of what a Fab City can be, provides public space, provides space for collaboration, and also provides space for local investment in both property and in local economic development, I would say. So entrepreneurship, this kind of thing. The other kind of network trends to point out, integration into local and regional policy. So we see cities kind of understanding the benefit of supporting Fab City initiatives in order to generate objectives towards things like a climate agenda or let's say social inclusion. We have the very interesting, a lot of public space activation, which obviously you kind of see this in the example from Puebla. Something which is really becoming obvious is community wealth building. So I think that this is something else that you're really invested in locally in Boston and Somerville and Cambridge. This is something that's really important to our cities and obviously also stems from that idea of public-private partnerships. We obviously have circular and regenerative economy and educational vocational training becoming a real hot topic because we need people who know how to do these things. Finally, I wanted to highlight the idea of regional collaboration. So this is very prominent and I think very interesting for you, being three different local, kind of close, but in a way you're making a mini region. We have a huge movement towards people kind of collaborating in a regional context. So Brazil, we have 2 different regions happening in France, sorry. And I think that this is something that's really coming about because people are really finding strength in numbers and having that critical mass in a local space. I can add some more. I know that I'm running way over time here. So I think just really a few other things, which is really interesting. The emergence of operating systems and digital infrastructures that are directly beneficial to makerspaces, fab labs, and also to communities. The interest in the network as in terms of resilience and resilience funding. And finally, I think something interesting is the diversification of funds that are actually coming into the network. So I know that this is something that you're interested in looking at, is what kind of funding is available and could be beneficial to your local space. What is interesting is we're seeing the interest of different kinds of funding organizations meet our Fab City agenda. So I think that this is something that if you're interested in kind of talking and collaborating with other cities, this is definitely a point at which you could really discuss some approaches. So that's all. I apologize for kind of chatting away. I've already been talking a little bit today. So I'm sorry, Lars, I 1 minute over from your call, but look, I think that's what's really interesting is the fact that everything that we're doing is a roadmap. So Sherry, you said before, you know, at the time it wasn't really the time when you originally pledged. I think this is actually the case for most cities. You know, this is something that takes time. It takes a building effort from the bottom up and top down at the same time. And I think that you're really on the road to be doing this from where we're sitting. So thanks very much. Looking forward to the rest of the session.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to take a moment. I'd like for us to ask some questions of Neil and Kate while we have them and before we move on to hear Alana. But I wanted to get a chance to just figure out, first of all, to hear who's here, right? Who is in the room, both virtually and in person. So if you don't mind, maybe you just introduce yourself and what organization you're from. It doesn't have to be a big introduction. So maybe we could start with you, Griffin.
I'm Griffin. I'm a recent graduate of Fab Academy. I'm a founder of a small tech company, Train Tracker. I'm very passionate about digital fabrication and the Fab City movement, so I'm excited to be here.
Well, we know you. How about you?
I'm Rebecca. I work with Fab Foundation, and I'm here just to listen and be tech support.
I think you have to leap into the camera frame
Oh, sorry.
a little bit.
Oh, there you go. Lars?
Hi, everyone. Lars Torres with Artisans Asylum, and I've been in Boston for about 3 years with a stint prior to that, and I really do feel like there's a quickening happening here, particularly in Somerville, but also in Cambridge and Boston. So I'm excited to have this group together and to nurse out some of those opportunities and see how we can build this infrastructure.
Nice.
I'm Leo, former Fab Nomad. I like to make Fab tools.
So explain Fab Nomad.
Yeah, so I traveled around the world visiting Fab labs and maker spaces. Great activity, would highly recommend. I think I met a few of you on my trip, actually. And I now direct a club network and help high schoolers run great creative technology clubs, or hot clubs. And I set up the lab in the building, actually.
That's right, you did.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tom Galligani. I serve as the Director of Economic Development for the City of Somerville, which is right next door to where we are here in Cambridge. And I'm excited to be here. We're also just about to reopen our Fab Lab at Somerville High School.
Yay.
We went through a $250,000 renovation of the new high school, and so be happy that students and the community will have access to our Fab Lab once again. So.
And then in the intro, I mentioned Percolating Plans of Somerville, and then as an ad, Sunday is going to be a local event.
Oh, yes,
And
Fab Festival on Sunday. We got
and
named out for tomorrow, so.
Mayor Curtatone will be joining that and have more to say about Somerville plans.
Hi, everyone. I'm Luciano Bertoldi. I've been with the Fab Foundation for going on 5 years now, and before that, I was at Fab Lab Barcelona.
Wonderful.
Everyone, I'm Russell Preston with Principal Group. We are a urban planning and design firm. We've done work with the city since 2012 on all the Green Line stations, a lot of the master planning around Somerville, and then we're also working with Summer Nova, which is where the event will be on Sunday, on their kind of long-term thinking around that innovation campus. So.
I'm Richard Bian. I'm currently a representative in Boston, Massachusetts. Our candidate is Charlie Baker, the current governor. And we have an election coming up September 14th for mayor of Boston.
That's right.
Hi, I'm Erica Schwartz. I'm with the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority. We are starting to think a lot more about workforce development, and we're also a major partner in the Foundry, which is a STEM and arts community center opening in about a year.
Wonderful. Oh, yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oye. I am kind of a floating head in the Fab Foundation, but I work closely with the Fab Foundation in DeSault, and I'm currently a Fab Academy instructor based out of DeSault, Waltham.
And I'm Greg Smith. I am at Dassault Systems, and we are one of the corporates that is helping out and supporting Fab Foundation, and we've been working with Artisans Asylum. We work with a lot of startups all over the world, plus the fabs, plus the makers, and, you know, we're just really into the whole ecosystem.
Thanks for
And with Dassault, we've had a great collaboration where each year they've donated a lab to a compelling location. And so one of them was in Rwanda, one was in Bhutan, we did one in Nepal focused on humanitarian relief. And then one of the most interesting ones was the southernmost city on Earth in Puerto Williams at the last stop before Antarctica. And potentially the next one's going to be in Haiti. That's a little complex to plan, but that's been a great collaboration.
I'd love to turn online now and
Sherry, why don't you just read across in some order?
I think, Claire, you're the first name I see that we don't know. Could you introduce yourself?
hopefully. Yeah, hi. I'm Claire Chackham-Bryan. I'm the Smart Cities Lead at Lake Macquarie City Council in Australia. We're just north of Sydney by about 2 hours. And yeah, we're looking at opening up our own Fab Lab. I've just purchased a few bits of cool equipment, including a Trotec laser cutter, which I can't wait to start playing with. But I also have a background. I'm actually a civil engineer and a town planner. So yeah, I bring all of that into the mix. And yeah, hopefully, as Kate said, hopefully, fingers crossed, Lake Macquarie, we can become a Fab City, and my equivalent, who's our circular economy lead, will be very interested in all of this too.
Thank you, Claire. Ida, I think you're next.
Hello. I'm sorry I was a bit late, but I know already the presentation of it from Kate. So I'm Ida from the Fab City Foundation, from the Fab City Network, and I was quite happy today to welcome 3 new cities that Kate already represented. And so I'm very curious to see, to learn about the workshop today.
Thanks, Ida. Sorry, I mispronounced your name
No,
there.
it's fine. It's English, it's German, you know, so, or Spanish.
Thank you. Is it Carl or Kurt? I can't quite read from here. Kurt. Sorry, Kurt, could you introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, I'm Kurt. I'm one of the board members at the Cambridge Hackspace, which is a community-based makerspace in Somerville.
Thank you. Fred, I believe you're next.
Hi, I'm Fred Wolflink. I'm recently retired from my position as a studio manager running the sort of new technologies area at Massachusetts College of Art, and I'm kind of just sort of dropped into this as in sort of general interest. I've been working for 30 years supporting students making interactive artworks, installations, sculptures, and I currently teach classes at Mass Art part-time for students working in that area.
Thank you, Fred. I have Laura next. Hi, Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Teicher. I'm Executive Director at Forge. We're a nonprofit that helps startups prepare to manufacture, and then we make right fit connections to the regional supply chain.
Thank you, Laura. And I have Shauna next on the screen.
Unmute myself. Hi, Shanna Farragon. I'm actually tuning in from Western Mass, Pioneer Valley. So Mount Holyoke, Pioneer Valley girl, I guess. Worked in and lived in Cambridge and Boston 30 years ago for Monitor, now part of Deloitte, and a long journey since, but I'm actually interested in establishing a Western Mass hub in Holyoke.
Wow.
Yeah.
Aiden, I think you're next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aiden. I am the Education Programs Manager at the Fab Foundation. And my work primarily involves working on the Fab Foundation's mobile Fab Labs, integrating digital fabrication into middle schools and high schools across the Boston area. So a lot of the education work that we've been discussing here is of interest to me.
Thank you, Aiden. Pardis. Pardis, are you there? Would you like, oh, there you are.
It's Pardis. I'm Pardis Safari. I'm the Senior Economic Development Manager with the City of Cambridge. So I work closely with Tom in Somerville, and just looking forward to hearing and listening from everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Pardis. Sorry about that. Tammy, I think you're next.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good. Awesome. Hello, so I'm Tammy. I was formerly the founder of an arts organization in Southern Maine, and ever since I attended, I think the Boston Fab 11 conference, I've been a huge fan. I've been stalking Fab Labs forever, but we did actually start a small Fab Lab in our arts organization as well here in Southern Maine. And I've since left the organization and hoping to move closer to Boston. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm just such a big fan of the work that the Fab Foundation is doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Diana, I think you're next.
Hi, everyone. Deanna, and I am the executive director of the Foundry Consortium, which is going to be operating that Foundry building that Erica was talking about. So a big focus on STEM and the arts there, a couple maker spaces in the space. So very excited to be part of this group and to hear more about what we're working on.
Thank you. And I think Melvin, you are the last.
Hi, I'm Melvin LaPrade. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. I've been working with the Fab Foundation for the last 2 years, working with the Scopes project. By training, I'm an urban planner, community development, community advocate. One of the things I'm primarily trying to focus on is the fabrication divide and looking at ways to ensure that all these equipment and technology reaches urban communities.
Thank you, Melvin. Thank you, everyone. This is a really interesting group of people, I have to say. I think that what I'd really like to do is sort of taking these ideas of, if you don't mind, kind of keep your questions and we'll do everything right after Alana. But, you know, we've been talking about how do we revitalize and bring and use small-scale manufacturing and the infrastructure, you know, as catalysts for this. And so, with that in mind, Alana, would you like to talk, actually?
Sure. I'll introduce myself briefly, and then I'm gonna share my screen. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited to talk with all of you, and I'm inspired by where not only the Fab Labs have spread over these many years, but to see the Fab City concepts really enmeshed in the work that I'm already doing in ways that I never really imagined. So I'm very excited to have this conversation. My name is Ilana Prus. I come from a city planning background. I have a company called Recast City. I focus on working with communities and with real estate developers to bring small scale manufacturing into economic development and downtown redevelopment work. My background, I worked at the US EPA in their smart growth division. I did real estate economic consulting. I was the vice president and chief of staff at the national nonprofit Smart Growth America for a bunch of years. But Recast City is really my passion. And so what I'm going to do today is really share the story of all of this with you from the perspective of what we've been talking about, from this perspective of achieving the Fab City outcomes. I'm still a newbie at the Fab City pieces, but I did a bunch of research to prepare, and I'm just really excited about where all the pieces start connecting up in this. So my focus is really going to be today on what can we do right now, right? What are the actions that work right now to start making a difference or continue to make a difference to achieve these Fab City outcomes? My focus is always on the next 3 to 12 months. Let's make sure that we're investing in actions that make a difference right now for people's lives, especially coming out of the pandemic anymore, especially where we are right now with the pandemic and the unpredictable nature of life right now. There's a lot that we can do right now to make a difference in people's and businesses' lives while building towards these outcomes that we've been talking about today. So I'm just going to take us through this a little bit. Hello, really excited to be here. I think there were a few things that really stood out to me as looking at the Fab City initiative that really sort of connected with me in a very personal way, right? This focus on economic growth and employment. To me, that looks like this in a lot of cases, right? Where do most people go? Is it Main Street? Is it downtown? Is it their neighborhood center? Where are those jobs? What kind of good paying jobs are we supporting? And this question of good paying jobs, I come back to again and again, because the biggest growth that we've had in employment since the pandemic hit is actually in low wage jobs, and sort of what are we doing to break out of that cycle? I love the whole concept of it, that it is people centered and really thinking about what does it mean for individuals, individuals' quality of life, and obviously for our environment that the people live in. I think it's important to sort of take that step back and realize that this is a holistic approach, not only about the circular economy for manufacturing and that production, but also for our cities, right? There are a lot of places that we have neglected over the past many decades for a lot of different reasons. Some very purposeful based on systemic racism. Some of them because of politics and the bias of urban versus rural in some places, and some because of international trade and the decimation of some of our communities because of that. And I think that it's important for us to take that step back and really think about how are we pulling this all together? And that while we're doing that, you're going to hear me use the word purposeful a lot today. How are we being purposeful about being inclusive in the work that we're doing? And a lot of the work that I do is getting communities to look at this business sector that I call small scale manufacturing, that, like you mentioned, Kate, nobody's really paying attention to necessarily. I call them the hidden gems. We'll talk about them in a bit. And getting people to realize that that there are people who make stuff across every different part of our demographic. And that's true internationally, obviously, as well. But to me is this amazing, exciting opportunity to build an inclusive base of business leaders that is inclusive of our demographic diversity. And then this focus on local production. I mean, this is where I live, is about local production. So when I do my work across the country with Recast City, well, before the pandemic, a lot of my work was going into communities and going into the production space of small scale manufacturing businesses to interview them, to understand what works and what doesn't work for them at a really detailed level, so that we understand what do we need to build around them for the infrastructure, the ecosystem, to make sure that those businesses can succeed in whatever way they're defining that. So the theme that I really want to talk about today is really how do we very specifically take action to invest in the people and places now to achieve these bigger, honestly, incredibly worthy and hard, bigger outcomes in the long term, that these are incremental steps along the way. I think it's important for us to take the step back and sort of realize where we are. None of this is going to be a surprise to you guys. These are just recent, headlines. Every day you can see different ones about the impact of COVID. And this is just in the US, right? The impact on women-owned businesses, the impact on Black and Brown-owned businesses, the impact on our neighborhoods, the lives lost, not only in the US, but across the world. And taking the moment to just sort of honor and mourn, honestly, the impact of what this has done in our communities, and that we need to recognize we're in a tough place of where we're starting. My work across the country, there are some states and some cities that almost had nothing closed for more than a couple of weeks because of the state rules. And so the impacts are very different in different places. But we do know that a lot of communities closed for a long time, a lot of businesses closed for a long time. And at one point early on last year, almost every small business in our country was closed for a period of time. We had millions and millions of people file for unemployment. And like I said, the jobs that are coming back are a small amount of high income jobs and a lot of low income jobs, and very little in the middle that are good paying jobs in the middle. Even before COVID though, in the United States, we were seeing a lot of different struggles and impacts happening. Nationally, I know this isn't true of the Boston region, but nationally we were seeing 80% of all counties seeing a decline in working age adult population. That's brain drain, right? Where are those youth going? What kind of jobs are they getting? That's the aging of our population, right? That's a lot of different things going on at the same time. We also in the United States had the highest income inequity we have ever recorded, and that was before COVID. And so if one of our goals is about being people-centered and about inclusion, we have to, I would say, as part of the Fab City goals, really address this kind of challenge head on and saying, what are we doing purposefully to address this kind of inequity in our solutions? And then we have vacancies, right? To me, this is not just about the tools, it's not just about the businesses, but it's actually about where are we putting these businesses so that we're creating these vibrant places that people want to live, that they're proud to live in, when we know, and this was even before COVID, we had huge impacts of vacant buildings, particularly storefronts, and the impact on nearby properties. And now on this side of the pandemic, we have vacancies in small cities and big cities across the country because of the closing of so many small businesses, but also because the consolidation of retail and the different ways that people are using storefronts. And so to me, part of the solution is how are we investing in a way that also helps the places that we want to be able to bring people together? So I think we're at a transformational moment. I really do. And this is true of the Boston region, and it's true of small cities in other parts of the country. I think we have a unique opportunity right now
to build strong, inclusive business communities in each of our regions and do it in a way that's investing in the Fab City ecosystem for the long term that Kate laid out for us. To me, this is really sort of straightforward in certain ways because we know what people are looking for. We know that people are looking for downtowns or main streets or neighborhoods that bring people together. We saw sort of the outpouring of people on the streets during when things were so closed down. People want to feel included and part of that success. They want to live in a place that looks and feels cared for, and people want to roll in that success. People really want to know that they're part of making it happen. And I know that from the Fab Lab perspective, that the grassroots side of this about what it means to have people included in making the success happen is a big piece of this. Just a little bit about me. By way of background more, on the left, you can see a picture of me of a dress that my mother sewed for me. She was the true maker in my family. She sewed, she knitted, she crocheted, she painted. She also taught us all how to use drills. I would say that, my brothers and I are probably better equipped because of my mother's encouragement of using tools than many other people I know. And then on the right is a picture of when I had the opportunity to give a TEDx talk called The Economic Power of Great Places. So investing and creating great places has always been a part of my work. The other big part of my work are these crazy kids that I also get to teach how to use drills and bring to maker spaces and Fab Labs. And are really some of the most creative beings I know. So my work in general is really focused on how do we bring this down to the city level, right? It's working with these business owners, with city leaders to find these businesses, to understand their needs, and to really implement it now around economic development, business development opportunities, the real estate that has to go along with this. And I know the work that Artisans Asylum is so much has to do with the real estate side of this right now. But also the capital needs. How are we investing in that pipeline of businesses that are going to be part of that longer term infrastructure? And usually I get to sit down at the table with you guys, but these days we'll still be on Zoom for a little while. So I want to take one step back and really think about sort of what it means to be where we have been from an economic development perspective, because a lot of this is in fact based on old economic development strategies. Not necessarily that the Boston region pursues these, but that this is still the dominant thinking, at least in the United States, about how we go about this. And I want us to think about going forward in a way that we're really pursuing a better model, investing in a better way that helps us achieve these Fab City outcomes. So the default model, there's a number of different things that are going on in it, and I'm just going to sort of hit the highlights briefly. The big problem with it is it's one size fits all, and I don't believe any of our communities are one size fits all. The biggest problem is that most of these, I like 80s music, I couldn't resist the 80s hair band example, but it's that most of our economic development strategy in a lot of places is really legacy from the 70s and 80s. That big business is king, and almost nobody pays attention to the small business, the care and feeding and the pipeline of those small businesses, everything from micro enterprise of one person, to with small scale manufacturing, we max out at 20 to 50 employees at the top end of that spectrum. We also have a lot of cities that are still spending huge amounts of money on recruitment and not thinking about, is that dollar potentially better spent to build up the capacity and the existing small businesses in our community as well. And then we think about these places that have been left behind that are not getting the investment anymore because of the offshoring of manufacturing, but also because the communities really don't know where to go next. They've been stuck in this stage in many cases for decades, and they feel very frozen by it because none of the investment is coming their way. We know that venture capital goes to, Boston is one of the beneficiaries, but really only goes to about 5 different cities. And that is a big barrier because it's still predominantly focused on tech and not thinking about the investment that you can get out of things that are going to scale more slowly, production, the hard production side of this. And then we have these other policies that have come down through the years, opportunity zones that made some real estate go really fast. And only now I'm starting to see a couple of funds happen around small business support, which was part of the original intent. And the racial wealth gap that we have in the country. This article talks about the white households having about 6.5 times the wealth of Black households. Other studies show it to be 8 to 10 times. This is a significant problem that we need to address head on. We need to be, from my perspective, we need to be incredibly purposeful about the investments that we make, not only saying what outcome are we working to achieve, like the Fab City overall outcomes, but who should benefit from those investments, and how do we get there? And then there's a real estate side of this. There's a real estate side of this that says, to me, we need to put these wonderful businesses in interesting places, but a lot of the development that's happening in different parts of the country are vanilla. They look like they're anywhere. You can't tell the difference based on what business is there or what the structure of the building is. And we've spread commercial uses in a way that retail is everywhere, like really expensive peanut butter. And so we have this emptying out of old malls or of some of our older neighborhoods in a way that really is neglectful of how are we reusing space, how are we reusing buildings, or turning them into better purposes. So what I want to do is really talk about how do we invest in a better way. And there's a couple of pieces that really sort of tie back into the Fab City outcomes. One is that it is about place. We need to invest in places as an economic strength. That when we invest in a quality place, a lot of other things follow. Second is that we have to also find that uniqueness. It's not just about, to me, it's not just about the manufacturing, but it's about what makes our place special. When you walk down a street, or even when you're in an older industrial area, what is there? What's unique about the businesses there? Either, they might be digitally connected to a network across the world, but they are of local flavor as well. And then those social connections. We know that businesses are much more resilient when they have strong social connections to other local business owners. And that how are we really being purposeful about making those individual and social connections between them as well. Excuse me. And that all of this helps the Fab City ecosystem. It's all about building, really, to me, what is the sort of the foundational level of where all of this big work is going. But like I said before, we need to do it with intention and purpose. And the intention and purpose is really about investing in the people and the places that are already there, and this new structure around it to help it scale, and sort of create that economic feedback loop by acting now, but thinking long term. So I do want to talk briefly about the small scale manufacturing businesses themselves. I think you guys probably know this better than most people, but the benefits of these businesses are manyfold, right? These product businesses are also our vendors, like Kate was talking about at Pueblo. They bring people out, they make people proud of being part of a community, and they create wonderful opportunities for us to build this more inclusive community of business owners. They do fill our storefronts. We can have storefronts that are doing production and retail in the same space, efficient on staff, efficient on space, but also in many ways making production very visible to our community in a way that people can be amazed by looking in a window and seeing something being made. And they help us reinvest in our community. This is the most basic example of it that there is. It's the coffee producer, right? The coffee shop up front. They roast their coffee beans out back, and they do a distribution to the entire region out the back door of this same space. This is what we love to see, and you can buy it in person or online, and they also have wholesale opportunities. But we know that when we take care of these business owners, we're attracting others of the same kind. Not only will we encourage more startups in this space, but we will bring people into a region that want to be a part of a production economy and help create these outcomes. So these are all thriving pieces of a strong local economy. Very briefly, the kinds of businesses that I focus on are often what other people consider lower tech, right? They're going to be selling online and using that as a technology tool, but they're using hand tools. They're using small industrial tools. They might be this is Katie Stack. She started in a 400 square foot space. She grew to 4 or 5 employees in a 700 square foot space where she was doing production and retail. COVID hit. She gave up her storefront and now is a distributed production model. Everybody's producing pieces of it at home with one online sales point, right? So how are we integrating this into our economic development strategy, where she now has 4 or 5 good paying jobs that she's supporting in her community that aren't going to go anywhere? Then we have the folks that you might be more familiar with, prototyping to small batch production. They could be making hardware. They could be scaling the production that they're making. And then we have larger scale, but that still fits into the neighborhood. This is a brewery. It's sort of the easiest example of that kind of thing. This is Rheingeist in Cincinnati. For our folks in Cleveland, you might have been there. They know that their brewery isn't just a place where they're creating product, it's also a community center. It's a place where people come together, which I think is an important theme in all of this to remember. And then things that you guys know really well, like maker spaces and fab labs with access to the shared tools. And then the ones that are specific to verticals in different parts of the industry, a commercial shared kitchen. What does that mean in terms of access to healthy food, regional food production, or a shared wood shop, or a shared welding shop, or a shared 3D production shop? So what does all this mean for the initiative? And what does it mean potentially for the Boston, Cambridge, Somerville region in working on this? I think it's really important, and this is really the base of the model that I create with Recast City, is that it has to be inclusive and people-centered. So much of the work that I do is based on going out and finding the right people to talk to. How are we being purposeful about finding the small-scale manufacturing business owners, making sure that they represent the demographic diversity of our community, figuring out who are all of the organizations and individuals that are already supporting that sector, and figuring out who has access to that support and who doesn't. Because asking the question of who's not accessing it is often even more important to understand than who already has access. Secondly, we do direct engagement with existing product businesses. What works for them? What are the assets that they're already thriving on in that community? What's missing? What are the big challenges that they're facing? And in the short term, how can we strategically fill some of those gaps without taking on an enormous initiative for the long term? Then we look at the real estate infrastructure for growth and inclusive access. That might be that there's a need for a commercial shared kitchen in a community. That might be a different kind of shared production space for small businesses, or it might be something that's more like co-work for individual production businesses to have low-cost, affordable space in a hot market. And then policies. Is it zoning? Is it permitting? What is it about the local policies that are going to make or break this from happening? We want to make it the easiest thing possible to do the thing that we want to happen. So removing whatever barriers that we can. So the question to me for the regional discussion, it really lands on this side of what can you act on in the next 3 to 12 months that will make a difference? That will make a difference for where the population of the region is right now, where we are with the struggle with the pandemic and the unpredictable nature of where we are. Can we disaster-proof our local economy and our small business community in some ways by how we invest and who we invest in and where we invest? And how do we make sure that we're aiming all of those investments in the direction of these smart city outcomes? So I would be remiss if I didn't let you guys know, I just wrote a book about all this stuff. It's called Recast Your City, How to Save Your Downtown with Small Scale Manufacturing. It is a DIY book. It's got worksheets. You can get the first chapter for free at the book's website, recastyourcity.com. But it really is all about how do you bring this together in your community. So here are 5 things that are going to be sort of my food for thought on this in terms of short-term actions. One is create affordable space for a diversity of small product businesses. The affordability of space, especially in a hot market like the Boston area, or in other areas where, if we're thinking about other areas, maybe aren't a hot market, but sometimes it's not, and it's not necessarily affordability, it's safe spaces that are in a state of good repair. How are we making sure that there is space for these businesses to not only get started, but to scale? Second, we have to fill in the gaps in assistance. There's a lot of programs that are out there. There's in fact a lot of people who don't access the existing programs that we have out there. We need new, what I call connectors, to reach new people who are business owners that aren't automatically connected into our systems. And this is really important to make sure that a diversity of business owners are being reached through our work. That's why when we do interviews with small scale manufacturers, we really focus on reaching that diversity of business owners to understand what those gaps are. But faith leaders, neighborhood leaders, cultural groups, who can we get to partner with us to really expand that network outreach and not just sort of have the same small group of people keep hearing the opportunities, the grants, the new program assistance. Oops, too many. Local anchors. I think this is something that gets talked about a lot of different times, but I think especially as we're looking at the Fab City outcomes, local anchors, as you know, have an enormous spending power. It often takes building a relationship with one person at an anchor and going and finding one regional manufacturer that can fulfill that need. And doing this in a one-by-one basis, especially with a local anchor that doesn't necessarily procure a lot of their physical products within the region. How do we build that relationship? How do we do that connection, that matchmaking that needs to happen? And really using the anchor's local spending power as part of achieving our outcomes. The Boston region has a lot of different anchors. It's one of the wonderful benefits of the area. And thinking about even just, each anchor making a commitment to put 2 new products into the local economy for their purchasing will start having big impacts. And then our policies, that might be zoning incentives in a hot market. We have affordable housing incentives, which I believe in it completely. Why don't we have affordable commercial space incentives so that our local businesses can continue to afford production in that area and retail in that area? And then community pride. I think this is something that you guys talk about sometimes, and I know that this is really important to me, is to really think about how are we getting the broader community really excited about this opportunity, that people feel this in a very personal way, so that they're putting their own energy and volunteerism behind it. So to me, this is all about taking action. You can get the first chapter of the book where I said, I'd also be very happy to connect up with everybody on LinkedIn. That's where I share the best practices that I find from other communities. That's where all of my chatter goes. I'm on other places too, but LinkedIn is definitely the best place to find me. And then thinking about how to take action, right, for these Fab City outcomes, it comes back to the people for me. It really is. It's about the places we want to live. It's about the people we want to be around. It's about the energy we want to create and the pride that we can support in people creating these local and regional manufacturing businesses that are creating good paying jobs in the community, supporting other people, and really the pride that they feel by being able to create these businesses themselves and create these good paying jobs within their community. It does take leadership. And I want to emphasize this as much as possible. This takes a lot of leadership. And so I really appreciate the representatives of the different local governments that have joined us today, because it makes making a commitment to where to invest and how to invest and who should benefit from that investment. And I think that right now with the American Rescue Plan Act funding that is coming or has come to all of our communities across the US, and hopefully other opportunities internationally, there is this unique moment to invest in a different way to make ourselves more resilient coming out of this. So to me, it really all comes down to making great places that people are proud to call home. But I think using this all as a way to aim and reach Fab City outcomes is going to be a really exciting place to go. So with that, I will stop talking and take any questions.
That is awesome. Yeah, so just 2 notes, Alana, so just so that you know, we're giving out your book here.
Oh,
so
right. Yes. Thank you, Joe.
And I also just wanted to note that we have other books here.
They're in the back.
Kate was part of the team that put together the Fab City book. So if you'd like a copy of that, and of course, Professor Gershenfeld and Bros wrote an amazing book called Designing Reality, which we also have. So please take anything home that you're interested in, because we have these 3 special people here today. And also, just as a note, we have this great lunch over there. You can, at any point, if you're hungry, just grab something. But we're just going to continue. So we're just going to eat and work at the same time, okay? So let's start with, actually, Lars, why don't you take the reins here?
Okay, I'll give it a try. Hi, Lana. Thank you so much. It's really exciting. Thank you, Neil and Kate, for setting the context too. I hope over the course of the conversation we've heard lots of we've built a beautiful constellation. Now we get to sort of like find the shapes within them, right? But I'm curious. So just to rewind a little bit, I remember when San Francisco made, a lot of cities about a decade ago, really got on the local bandwagon to create everything from Timbuktu bags to more sophisticated products in onshore manufacturing. Can you give us, from where you've been, a status
update on those initiatives? And are there one or two lessons from that that we should kind of be aware of as we look to restart that kind of momentum? And particularly thinking about Somerville Made, Tom, I know that we had that going for a while. There's been a Boston Made initiative. They tend to falter. I don't exactly know why, and maybe you have an idea.
I feel like there's a whole book written about this. I will give you a couple of points just from my experience with communities. I think that the San Francisco Made, SF Made, is sort of the grandma of all of them. They started first with wonderful leadership and really expanded to the region with these very purposeful partnerships across the different cities and counties. I think one of the strengths of it is that it was independent of local government, but got funding from local governments as a part of its work. And it created, like you guys were talking before, very specific measures of success as part of its work that it reported out on. And it also was it is a very integrated approach where it is initially about supporting this business sector. That was its primary reason, but then realized that they had specific gaps. And part of that was finding affordable space. And part of that was finding good employees and trained employees. And so the work expanded over time, but its primary work was always about supporting this business sector and very focused. Other communities that I think have done a really good job of it also have this entity that's outside of the government, but is funded and does partner with the local government. So the other example I would point out is the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center, which originally focused on tech startups as part of the Knoxville ecosystem. We worked with them 5-6 years ago. We sort of brought this, they said, we have this concept that it's here, but we don't really know who they are. The city had created this Mayor's Maker Council, which then got the community organized. And then Knoxville Entrepreneur Center, we helped them create a partnership with the Knoxville Urban League because they were both running startup programming. They had defined it in different ways, but they both had product businesses going through their programming. But there was quite literally a racial divide between those two programs. And so creating that partnership really strengthened the whole ecosystem so that they have an annual summit, an annual maker summit. They have the website, The Maker City. If anybody else wants it, you got to fight Knoxville for it. They do tons of educational programming for product businesses. A lot of it's through Etsy's training. So I think it's important to think about it that way. Baltimore also is the hidden gem in all of this. They have the Made in Baltimore program, but they've done a whole bunch of organizing, incredibly racially inclusive programming in Baltimore. They have one of the largest maker spaces there, OpenWorks Baltimore, which does a lot both for education and training, but also in support of small product businesses. They most recently, Made in Baltimore most recently ran a program called Home Run Accelerator that competed assistance for a cohort of home-based businesses to go through a training and then get some subsidized funding and introductions and matchmaking introductions to real estate owners and landlords to be able to move into storefronts. So they're very specifically looking at all of the steps to get these home-based businesses into storefronts over time. And I think it is that minutia of attention that this sector really needs, and that the programs that are the most successful are really talking directly to the business owners to understand what their needs are, and then filling those very specific gaps.
Yeah, I would add one thing to that, which is Fab Labs that try to sell what they make have failed. The ones that succeed sell making. And so the distinction is, if you make something, there's commercial value just in the object. There's value in import substitution and the impact on the supply chain. There's value in life outcomes for the people doing the making. There's value in the environmental footprint of the city. And the labs that succeed don't pick a winner from them, they pick all of them, and all of them add up to the sustainable business model. And in doing that, there's very strong assumptions about what is an economy. Like a colleague, Blair Evans, who's run Fab Labs in Detroit, very explicitly runs it where about a third of the activity is straightforward traditional commercial activity. A third
is economy, but not priced in dollars. It's barter and exchange and other measures of economic contribution. And a third of it is sort of investment in the community for the sort of wealth of the community, not for straight economic output. We're now setting up super labs to make labs. The next one is coming in Bhutan, which, as you know, is based on gross national happiness, not gross domestic product, which doesn't mean they're happy, but it means the job of the outcome is well-being. And so there's very strong, it's easy to get distracted by the widgets. There's very strong assumptions about what is an economy. And the goal is well-being in the economy, which is more profound than just selling the objects from the lab, and really learning how to price the benefits of the making in the lab.
Yeah, it sounds to me like we have two very clear models to sort of keep together in our minds. One is the how do we support Main Street manufacturing, where they may have, as Alana's pointed out, their own setup internally, and on the other hand, the spaces for making things.
Don't think of that. I mean, so one of the hottest things in investment right now is multiple bottom line businesses, where having social and economic bottom lines helps the financial bottom line. I wouldn't separate those. In a lot of different ways, frontiers of business development have to do with measuring business output beyond money output.
Yeah, well, we have some economic folks here. What are you seeing happening? It'd be great to hear Tom and Erica.
Or just in the observations you have from your hearing too.
Any questions, comments from the last hour and 20 minutes?
Well, there's a lot here, and that's I'm excited. The first time I've been to an event to meet other people and to talk about what's happening. We've been so varied as an industry, as economic development professionals, so strung out over the last 18 months, just trying to keep all of our businesses alive and functioning in our community. So this is a great opportunity just to absorb and just to see what's happening. And I'm curious, Alana or any others, I'm wondering, we're in the early days of this ARPA funding, these huge chunks of money that are becoming straight to communities from the federal government. And I wonder if there's any sense from you, from your network across the country, of what communities are doing and how they're prioritizing this funding source to make an impact on the maker movement or on local manufacturers.
Yeah, especially in the hot markets, we're really encouraging folks to look at the affordability of space for these businesses, both for the individual businesses and like what Neil was talking about, the sort of the infrastructure kinds of businesses around them, because it is going to take both. And we're seeing a lot of these product businesses getting priced out of our bigger cities because the markets have just, I mean, I assume we all see the articles about how the housing market has gone insane in all of our bigger cities and even in some of our smaller ones. And we're seeing really weird things happen on commercial space. We have sometimes high vacancies, but still high prices. So there's a lot of sort of weird unknowns. There's three areas that we always look at: business development support. So how are we finding the existing product businesses that are out there and helping them be more resilient as business owners and as businesses increase their market and their production and their network. The second is going to be the real estate side of it, as there are space for them to do the production as they scale, both from micros to slightly larger. And then the third is the capital. The capital side of it is really a struggle. I actually think the Boston region did better on this than a lot of other areas, just anecdotally from my reading, with creating funds purposely for Black and Brown business owners that weren't necessarily available through the bigger programs. When I talk about who should benefit, I really mean getting specific about who should benefit from our investments, because when we just put out programs, it doesn't matter which of those three kinds of programs, and we say, oh, we want small scale manufacturing business owners to benefit, that's narrow, but it's not as narrow as saying we want to make sure small scale manufacturing business owners who didn't benefit from past funding or who were neglected because of systemic racism in the past, or right, we can look very specifically at who we want to benefit to make sure that we are in fact making a difference where we want, and that becomes a very measurable kind of outcome to look at. So it has to be based on what we're hearing, though, from the small scale manufacturers in the community. What's the biggest gap that they're dealing with? Maybe it's marketing. Maybe it is contract manufacturing space to help them have elastic scalability within the region. There's a new startup that I've been paying attention to now called Saltbox, which is an elastic fulfillment center for small product businesses where you can hire people by the 5-minute increment, right, to do your fulfillment. So there's some, and they just closed their Series A funding round, right? So there's these really interesting things that are becoming part of the ecosystem around this that I think we have to recognize.
Yeah. I'd like to ask Alana, because you challenge us a lot on the question of building inclusive economies and intergenerational wealth amongst historically marginalized groups. I'd be curious, Kate, what are you learning across the Fab Lab network about what building inclusive spaces looks like, and what might be some lessons for us here as we start to think about our ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think something that kind of comes to mind from the discussion you was having, and maybe is also connected to this, is the need for a way of thinking which is ecosystemic, which is about an ecosystem of actors and different kinds of actors, but different kinds of industry, different kinds of participants, and how that ecosystem can sustain something that is unique to the place in which you are. So, for example, this kind of manifests in different ways in different cities, and I think it is something to say that it's not about just highlighting those actors, but it's about understanding how that way of thinking can be embedded through things like education models, things like different open kinds of funding, different kinds of funding that rely on, for example, participation coming from the community members themselves. So it's not about kind of rehashing or trying to ignite, let's use this word, reignite ways of working that we have had in the past, but actually identifying in an ecosystemic way, what are the opportunities in our local place, and then how can we actually work together in that way. I think in terms of, social inclusion, social inclusivity, this is something that we see reflected in the cities that we're working with. So we see cities really trying to embed this way of thinking and therefore way of working through different programs, including, for example, definitely through education programs. So I think new ways of educating, new and different ways of thinking about education that are not only formal education, so informal education programs. For example, we also think about different kinds of spaces. So this is again to do with what we're saying before about bringing multi-use spaces, multi-purpose spaces, spaces that have multiple uses based on the needs of those people in that ecosystem. Not necessarily in that city, but beyond the city, into the actual fabric of who they are and what they do and how they work. And I think also something else is about that, those funding models. So we see, for example, a good example, we talked about Puebla. Puebla is understanding different actors in an ecosystem and where the finances are actually hitting in terms of where they're crossing over naturally, and then where can they accelerate crossovers. So different ways of actually thinking about and mapping existing ecosystems and then accelerating and supporting those ecosystems. We see working quite a lot to try to understand and try to benefit this kind of social inclusion. I hope that
I just wanted to add to that. Megan Smith, who was Obama's CTO, was interested in that, explicitly that question. I connected her to a group of really impressive people in the Fab Lab network who have been leaders in reaching out to underserved, marginalized communities. So a network from Africa, India, Asia, Pacific Rim, Latin America, and it's become a really interesting working group that they got together just to do a presentation, and they've been meeting, I think, weekly on. There are all these great examples of programs that are reaching underserved communities, bringing in girls. This is one of Megan's diatribes. There are really good solutions out there, and what's needed isn't what are the solutions, but how to share them. And so for anybody interested, I can connect you to this really interesting DEI work group in the lab network.
That'd be terrific, Neil. Yeah, thank you. Maybe there's a link to go back where someone could put in. I'm not sure.
In addition to this, I believe that the government needs to participate with the people. I think that the government says something like, I give money to organizations, and the organizations needs to co-design with the citizens, and they are waiting for what is the organization do with the project. You know, for example, in the city in Boston, they have many projects related with food, with kids, but the sponsors are the organizations. It's not the government. What is your opinion about the government and the city? The government and the organizations and the citizens.
I can offer one recent example from the Washington, D.C., where historically there's been a set aside from the D.C.'s government. Funding comes to the federal government, and there's been a $7 million set aside typically for a certain set of institutional nonprofits that are seen as legacy. They just voted to eliminate that set aside and bring that money back and make it available specifically for new and emerging organizations. And one of the things that I have seen is that often organizations start with an individual who has a passion about an issue, and then they organize other people. And now being able to secure funding, whether you're organized as a nonprofit or not, which is a laborious process, you can be funded as a social benefit organization or something like that. So I think there are efforts in city government to crack open maybe those funding pipelines and make them more directly accessible to people. I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about, but I think it's a positive example, and I don't know if Tom or other economic development people have insights into that.
I was just wondering if those of you who are in the rooms, whether virtual or real, I mean, does this ring true, some of the things that we're talking about with Alana and some of the ways, and Kate, and the ways of kind of getting started sooner rather than later? Can you see the funding being used in that way? I mean, can you imagine, what do you imagine for reinvigorating our communities?
Well, a lot of the stuff that Alana is talking about really rings true to me and to what we're trying to do with Somerville, and we don't always succeed, but really focusing on the smallest of businesses, because the larger businesses, they have many advantages, or they have levels of sophistication within their organization that they can sort of handle a lot more stuff. But it's the little folks, everything from just support with HR. The world of HR is so complex that it's hard for a small business to really understand and be up to date with everything that's happening, and how to be a good an employer and to really treat your employees well. And so something that we're looking at is trying to see if we can provide those services, or find a way to incentivize an organization to provide those services, those HR services, to outsource those HR services to small businesses so that they can be better employers and they can keep their employees longer. And so trying to look at the workforce development side of things, but from the small business perspective, is something that we've been focused on, or at least starting to focus on the last year or so. So, but all of what Alana talks about is talking to those businesses, listening to them, and figuring out a way to support the weaknesses that they will describe to you. So, and that changes based on the type of business. It changes on the industry and the scale of that business too. So it's, but just trying to think from their perspective and to think small and to support in a small way.
Sherry, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave in a couple of minutes for a meeting. Unfortunately, I've had to fit in another one.
Oh, okay.
And I'd like to raise, noting time going away, I'd like to raise a challenge on my way out, which is Boston potentially can be a real global leader in this initiative. Right now, the whole isn't greater than the sum of the parts. In the remaining time, I think one of the really important things to look at is how to link all of these separate great initiatives regionally so the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts.
Okay.
And so with apologies, I'm going to have to take off, but I'll stay in touch through everybody here.
Okay.
If I could jump off that point and also just to talk about what you were just saying and calling on the cities. I mean,
Pardees is with the city of Cambridge, so she's the one who really is the economic expert as far as representing Cambridge government. And the redevelopment authority is sort of a separate entity, and we try to fill gaps. And one thing we think a lot about lately is, and because we're a redevelopment authority, is how we can acquire or subsidize land and space. And we've been focused a lot on housing. And I really appreciated what Alana said about, we have these incentives to require affordability in our housing, and we don't have them in other areas. For years, I've thought that about the nonprofit world. There's nothing to support nonprofits who have to compete. And the same is true, I think we all understand, a poor family, we kind of can imagine what the hardship is when they're trying to find housing. But it's the same for nonprofits, and I assume small businesses. It's like the smaller you are, the harder it is to just get to that space. So we have been thinking a lot about how we can invest in land and spaces to enable this work to thrive if we provide that foundation. But from what Neil just said, it just makes me think there's still some, Boston's getting so insane, but there's still more pockets in Boston proper than there are in Cambridge and Somerville that are lower cost. It just makes me think, how do we think regionally about what we do where to make all of our resources go farther for the region?
Definitely a regional problem, right? The high cost of real estate. And it's great when we get a chance to work together between Cambridge and Boston and Somerville and some of the other emerging communities outside of those areas to try to solve some of these problems. Transportation is a key component, finding opportunities to get people from point A to point B so that our separate entities can be a stronger, really strengthen that network.
So Melvin had a question coming through via the Zoom. Melvin, you want to share your question? I think it relates here.
Yeah, I think my question was, I was thinking about the, if you read the question, I wrote it better than I can say it right now. So could you read it to me?
Yep, you indicated that the clustering force, in quotes, of young creatives and tech workers in metropolitan areas often led to greater economic prosperity overall, but also displacement and gentrification. And you asked the group here, Alana and the Fab City group, how could city planning address this issue going forward?
It's a great question, Melvin. Thank you for asking it. I'm a part of the problem. I mean, I for years was an advocate and a sort of a tech support on mixed use and downtown redevelopment and all of those pieces that created these great places, but an enormous amount of displacement. And I think one of the things that we all, I'll speak personally, one of the things that I neglected in my work was thinking about what does it mean to invest in a neighborhood with the people who live there now? And I think that's a really different kind of question. We never said from the very beginning, like, who should use this space in the future? Who should have access to this space in the future? And I think that when we start talking about who should have access to that space in the future, and this comes back to what Erica was just talking about, if we say we want the ground floor to be accessible to our local businesses, right? Because there's residential displacement and then there's commercial displacement, which almost never gets talked about also, which is a whole thing unto itself. If we talk from the very beginning about who we want to use a space in the future, then the whole concept of what's called highest and best use, right, in the real estate and economic development gets turned on its head. So it's highest and best use to whose benefit? And that our policies can shape those outcomes in ways that we're honestly just not doing very much right now, unless we're with a CDC or a redevelopment authority. And so I think there is a really exciting opportunity going forward to ask those questions differently. To me, the question is, where does the Fab Lab go? Who gets access to it? What neighborhood is it placed in? How are we making sure that not only the job training opportunities are in neighborhoods where displacement could be happening in the future, but the business creation and the business growth opportunities are coming out of those neighborhoods too, so that that neighborhood's wealth can build and potentially be a part of the future as new development comes. And so I think these are really important questions. And one of the reasons that I always start with existing product businesses in my work is because we want to find the people that are in those neighborhoods that are already doing this, so that as we continue to grow and change, those are the people who are going to benefit from this. It's not about new funky startups from outside the city. It's about the people there now and how we're benefiting them and making sure that they are part of this foundational set of investments for what Fab City wants to create long term.
So can I ask Erica, because I think the city of Cambridge put a lot of thought into the Foundry and sort of the underlying values and principles that guide where it's going from day one, the day it opens its doors. I wonder if you could share a little bit of that story and how some of that work informs this discussion.
Sure. I think the Foundry is a great success story, but I think its history is imperfect. And I think Diana, if I don't know, she might have not been able to stay the whole time. Our new executive director is going to take the history and fill in the gaps where it was imperfect in the past. So it really was born out of like a grassroots community effort, but it was, and this was preceded my time with the CRA, but it was a lot of really well-meaning older white homeowners saying, we should have this thing and it should be for the people who are, cut out of traditional sciences and arts. Like we want to create this space so that, girls and people of color can connect to science and technology and the arts. So I think it's unfortunate that it didn't from the start actually connect with local communities on the ground who it was saying it wanted to be for and have them help define it. And yet, those communities have become involved more over time, and there's a really concerted effort to, I think, go back a little and connect with like local, we have a lot of local like former settlement houses in the city, places that work with immigrants who are we're outside of that public process who are now starting to get engaged. And that's the staff, and Diana was hired in part because she has such a strength in knowing how to do that kind of organizing and community building and truly meaningfully bring people in, not just so that they're kind of sitting there, but that they're actually helping to shape a plan.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in Cambridge, the Cambridge Public Library offers all of those things.
The Foundry was thought of in the context of what was already in the city. So yeah, the library, Neil mentioned that the library in the past couple of years opened a new Fab Lab, but it's limited, it's small. And the Foundry is limited too. So we tried to have things that wouldn't be too duplicative, that wouldn't be available elsewhere for free or for cheap. And the library is probably the only other place in Cambridge where you can go for free to do some of this work. But the Foundry will have some things that the library doesn't have. The library has some things that the Foundry doesn't have.
So yeah, and just to add on to what Erica's saying, these are also geographically in two different places in the city. So the Foundry is in East Cambridge, close to where you all are located. The library is in kind of the central part of the city, closer to North and West Cambridge. So these are providing opportunities in multiple locations across the city, which is also beneficial.
So again, I don't know what's available right now at the Foundry. I haven't been there for a long time, but at Cambridge Public Library, even though you're saying it's limited, it didn't see, I was just there yesterday, it did not seem to be limited at all. They have a vinyl cutter and laser cutter and this and that. They're like so much equipment. As you're talking about it, not that I'm a specialist in it, but I can't think of anything that is not offered there.
I think it's a question of capacity, right? I think the thing would be that in addition to the Cambridge Library, there's probably a demand for 10x that amount of space. And so how do you diffuse the infrastructure throughout the city is part of the question, maybe. So
yeah, and I mean, I think the other thing to think about too is the Foundry is going to have, and Erica, you can correct, and folks correct you if I'm wrong, but we'll have spaces for, beyond just residents in the sense of like community groups and nonprofit organizations to expand their services and programming as well. So both entities provide services to the Cambridge public, but and sometimes in different ways. So it is a capacity issue. It's also an audience issue as well.
Yeah, for me, it's that, no? How can we create communities? Because the engages is the difficult thing in young people, in old people, in persons, no? It's difficult. How can we create communities? We can talk about that. Someone has an experience in how can we create communities?
So again, not to harp on library, but in order to use that equipment, you have to take like safety course and this course, and you get a stamp for each, blah, blah, blah. As you take in the courses, that's a great way to create the community, because people are together for, I have no idea, but an hour, 2 hours, whatever. I can't see any better opportunity than that.
I think one of the dividends of that, and I think, Alana, maybe you have some insights here, but one of the advantages of a third space, a great third space, right, whether it's a library or now something like the Foundry, is that you break networks apart. Often resources flow within networks, and if you can create a space where people from all economic backgrounds are getting excited about their shared creativity, then you're creating new networks, right? And every new node that you add to that network is a potential for resources to flow in new ways, and I think that's a critical role for these spaces.
I completely agree. Yeah.
The reason I brought up the library, because library is accessible to everybody. There is no gradation, discrimination, whatever.
It's so true.
Yeah.
I think the only challenge is we just have one. So let's build upon that model and create more access, I think, is something the Fab Foundation and Fab Labs do really well.
And that's one thing members of the Foundry group have talked about. We've talked about this with Artists Asylum. Also members of the library is how can we create a network where maybe you have some kind of membership and you can, you're already kind of signed in, so you can show up at the library, you can show up at the Foundry, you can show up at Artists Asylum, and you're sort of already part of the same network, so that you can just show up and use the different tools there. And maybe one day you want to use the vinyl cutter and it's not free at the library, so you go someplace else. So how do we make those
I
connections?
think, Tom, you guys have done some experiments. Could you describe it for the group, and then what have you learned from it?
Well, we invested in this software platform, and I should know what it is, but basically a digital badging platform, so that if somebody takes a course, and we made this available to all of our nonprofit partners who are delivering education. And so, theoretically, if it works really well, you take a class at our Fab Lab and you're certified in vinyl cutting or whatever, or you meet the safety protocols, and you've got this digital badge that you carry with them. And so theoretically, you should be able to show that to an employer, ideally. I have the skill, I can demonstrate the skill, but I can see, Erica, how we could address what you're talking about, building that network. So I'm already pre-certified. I can go into any Fab Lab in Cambridge, Boston, Somerville, and those folks will know that I'm not going to set the place on fire, right?
It's interesting. Have you connected that to the local industry?
No.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting because it's fledgling, and we've been, the software provider was starting up, and we were kind of a beta test. And it's interesting because, we were paying for the software from the city's perspective, and we're hoping people use it, and it really would get some traction. And then we were, because of COVID, for other reasons, we were late to sign up for our subscription. And all of a sudden, our workforce development provider, our adult education provider, is freaking out because she said, we've moved all of our people to utilize this platform, and so when we start in September, we need to know that these people can start taking advantage and getting those digital badges. It's central to, now we've shifted the way we assess these people and to qualify these people, and so we need this. Can you make sure you pay the bill? And so and that was like an awakening, like, oh wow, okay, great. So it is what we're hoping it will be, and that people find the value. The training providers find value because it gives people a certification. But you're right, we haven't really explored how meaningful are those certifications with those digital badges for employers when they see them.
It feels like that would be a nice thing to be able to do, is to pull those two together and then make it incredibly valuable, even more valuable than it already is.
Yeah, that's a great insight.
And then is it scalable to Boston and Cambridge? Right?
Well, and finding out from the larger employers, which of the skills are they really in need of, right? There are some really good job training programs that are actually been created on the flip. So one of the old textile towns, I think it was actually in High Point, North Carolina, they went to the major manufacturers and said, what are the gaps? What are you trying to hire for and what don't people know? And then they built a program based on those needs so that they could send people directly into that employment pipeline. I think for each one of these, each tactic or each tool is phenomenal, but it's always important to take that step back and say, what outcome are we trying to achieve and who's going to benefit from it? each one of these things that you guys have been talking about, right? There's outreach and the connections and the diversity of engagement and the grassroots work to make personal diverse connections to bring new networks into the work that you're doing and the programming. There's the education and training that you're talking about now. There's business development, which is different from those other two. And then there's the step from that to the circular economy piece and sort of being really purposeful as you go through making commitments, I hope, picking specific actions to keep doing, but thinking about which part of that pipeline, yes, and continuous learning and the feedback around with all of that. Thank you, Shauna. I think that it's important to think about where are you fitting into this sort of continuum of the work that you want to create, and which part is actually the greatest both in need, but also makes the biggest impact in achieving the long-term outcomes. Because there's always more things that we can do than we have time or capacity or funding to do. And so I always come back to what is that outcome, who should benefit, and then having that direct the investments.
Actually, just anecdotally, as you may know, we run the Fab Academy program out of the zone locally here in Walton. Professor Gershon teaches it, and many labs participate throughout the world. And over the past few years, we've had quite a few people graduate and go on to work in local industry, and we've built some relationships with local employers where they actually come to us and turn to us and say, can you please continue to connect us with your graduates, because we've already hired 2 or 3 of them. We have people that are now moving on, and we'd like to kind of continue doing that. So that's another pathway.
I think,
I know what Laura said earlier about the network effect is kind of how we can accelerate the creation of this economy. And I just think of years, 15 years ago when the steel yard down in Providence got going more, and finally we started asking questions there about, can you make bike racks? Can you make trash cans? And it sort of changed the direction of where the city was buying that from some fabricator across the country or from overseas to people that we knew in the neighborhood were making that stuff. And then that led to more jobs, and that led to more making, and it actually made the city a better place. I think what Alana, and this is kind of a question for you, is what places are you seeing that have a realigned policy or realigned sort of, that support network for creating these economies more quickly? Because I think for me, I just go to like the very concrete around, like, how can we close those loops and tighten, start to produce more locally? And again, cities are very complex places. It goes back to, how can we kind of reconnect the resources better, to Laura's previous point? Because I don't know.
I think that's the $100 million question. And I think it is both high tech and low tech, right? I think that the sort of mapping work that you guys were talking about with the Fab City is going to be really important, so that ultimately can a producer or an anchor institution just look at something that is very digitally accessible and say, oh, that steel producer, right, produces this, maybe they can make bike racks for me, right? How do we make the information universally available and the businesses that are part of it representing the diversity? I think there's also just a personal touch to this right now. I think the places that I have met that are the most successful at this have a person that is literally making these introductions and building these connections between the anchors and the small manufacturers. I can never remember anybody's name. There's a guy I met out in Michigan in one of the head of one of the county economic development authorities, and he said he literally sits down with a major manufacturer or a major institution and asks them about what they're buying. What products are they buying from where, at what level of specificity, ISO, whatever, that they need. And then he takes that information and he goes out and talks to the other producers that he knows in the region and does that direct matchmaking. I think that it's a lot of time, but I think that at the beginning in particular, we have to create these lines so that it can become more automatic.
So Alana, we've got about 5 minutes left here, and we can linger as long as folks online want to linger, but I want to respect your time. So I want to close up really quick with a quick question for Kate that has come from the floor here. Could you talk about the Hamburg experience and how that relates to the topics here around city involvement, perhaps? And then also, And then Laura, I have a follow-up question.
Well, just as a note, I believe Hamburg has just gotten funding from the EU of like millions and millions to invest in Fab City. And so I kind of just want to hear about how they're framing it, you know, and how, maybe what direction they're going in.
Yeah, actually, while you're talking, I think it's really interesting to, maybe for your information from the network perspective, the conversations you're having, I was in a very, very similar context with the folks in Plymouth in the UK about 2 weeks ago. It was pretty much the same conversation. So I think that that is really, really interesting for you in terms of being part of a network and having access to other organizations and other cities in other contexts that have very similar needs and very similar challenges. The conversation in their case was around the high street, but I think it really resonates with a lot of the things that you're talking about in terms of, you know, this way of working and the way that you're looking at your context. And I think that that's also echoed in places like Paris, for example. So the Fab City Grand Prix, which is one of our earlier Fab City network members. So I think that, you know, one of the things that you can do as being part of this network is, and we can help facilitate for you, is setting up those conversations. You know, we can set up the conversations with the people from Plymouth and Paris and you guys in one room, so you can kind of discuss these similarities, and it would be our pleasure to do that, because I think it would be very, very useful. That would be the first thing. And then the second thing is, yeah, around the idea of Hamburg. So they, I think that this really talks to this idea of the community champion. So this person who is in the city and is really dedicated to the Fab City idea within the city, and is willing to drive the idea home, and is willing to be the advocate for the concept of Fab City. That's kind of what happened in Hamburg. We have Benedict, who's a really great advocate for the Fab City network, for the Fab Lab and way of working. And he really understood the local context and the local need, and understood people engaging with the idea of Fab City and all the benefits that it could provide the local context. So basically, they've been able to raise around, I believe in total, it's something around 5. I believe one project is 5 million, but in total it's 14. Around the idea of the strengths of that city, which is open source digital development, and also connected to integration in the city in physical spaces, and understanding really well a focus for that funding. So what are the key focuses that are going to be, you know, provided to the city and its ecosystem, and then what does that then feed back to a network? So this was the important thing for Fab City Hamburg, was that it wasn't just about Hamburg. It was about what is the ability of Hamburg in terms of feeding and being part of a network. So I think that's also something to keep in mind, is that the benefit that you create locally is in the end able to put your city on a global stage, you know, and able to really connect your city across multiple levels of engagement. And this is a huge benefit to local, to governments and to funding bodies.
So thank you, Kate. Ilana's going to have to run here. I know some of you were pulling in from holidays with family, and thank you all for coming. Ilana, I know you're in that camp. So why don't you bring us home, and then we can linger and continue the chat. Laura, if you've got 5 minutes, I'd love to hear what's happening up at Forge from you.
And I apologize that I have to jump, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think that the potential in the Boston region with the resources and the excitement that you have for all these different pieces is really extraordinary. The potential to do so much good for so many people in the region is, I think, unlike almost anywhere else in the world. And so I really hope coming out of this that you guys come up with a short list of actions that each one of your jurisdictions and partner organizations can commit to really over the next 12 months, that you guys can make happen to continue to move in this direction. And so I'm excited to see that. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, please reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat. But you know, I'd be excited to see where all this goes and how everything goes. And Lars, when you got your new space, I can't wait to come visit.
Yeah, everyone's welcome.
Thank you, Alana.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Virtual
great
round
day.
of applause for Alana.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Laura, dive in. I think there's folks who are interested to hear your story about how you're working up there to build a network and advance that sort of manufacturing pipeline.
Absolutely. I am supposed to have a 2:00 call, but I just got a note they're running late. So if they call, I'm going to hop off quickly. But the work we're doing at Forge has actually been happening for several years. It was just very quietly under an unknown brand initially. And we were really created as a spin out of Greentown Labs, which is the largest clean tech incubator in North America, because they're helping climate tech innovators to make products to mitigate climate change, which ultimately means they're making hardware products or components to plug their software or AI into the physical world to mitigate climate change. Today, Forge helps any and all innovators, startups that have a manufacturable product, component, supply chain needs. Sorry?
It's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. We help any and all innovators first get ready to manufacture. A lot of them don't come from this background. And then we make right fit connections to the regional supply chains. We're very focused on helping make innovative products locally. Currently, that footprint is majority based in Massachusetts and New England. And this invitation really intrigued me because even though for several years we've been helping make over 400 companies make innovative products in the region, we have hundreds of local manufacturers and suppliers, mostly in Massachusetts. And as I shared in the chat, less than 6% of them are actually in Somerville, Boston, and Cambridge. So I am really intrigued. We believe in the power of hyperlocal. We've demonstrated it offers competitive advantage for innovators, that interventions around manufacturing are important, that local partners are important. But I'm still wrapping my head around the idea of pulling more manufacturing into the part of the state where real estate is most expensive. And I'm curious to hear more about that vision.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. That was perfect. Just what we wanted to hear.
Well, I think it's exciting. I mean, in Alana's book, one of the things that's really clear is, we used to almost talk about these as like cottage businesses or cottage manufacturers, and it's what a lot of the examples are in terms of Main Street manufacturing. That said, I think Fab City and circular economy, the materials efficiency question, opens up a lot of opportunity for other kinds of actors to enter into the Main Street manufacturing ecosystem. It was interesting to see, I think, Leo, maybe you were a part of a conversation where folks were experimenting with recycling cups or using different materials to kind of use to make commonly used items more accessible, having been locally made from biomass and whatnot. Do you remember this?
I did, but there maybe are people in the room that know more about that than
Okay.
me.
Okay.
But yeah, at our old CFC location, they used to run workshops for the Materion.
Okay.
I would also say that this is a really salient time to be having this conversation. I threw it in the chat, but again, I'm super regionally focused. Massachusetts, other states in New England, quasi agencies that have a lot of money, they're all paying more attention than ever to the need to localize supply chains to reduce the risks we've seen with global supply chain disruptions during COVID, the Suez Canal, the new semiconductor shortage. So I think there's much more awareness and appetite from government and quasi that can help fund new investments because of the time that we're in. And I'm excited to see how we can weave all these groups together, because this is one of multiple groups I'm participating in, talking about how we can encourage small local manufacturing.
Right on. Claire.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Also agree. Sovereign manufacturing is becoming such a big focus, given everything that has definitely happened. Our region that we're in is heavily reliant on coal mining. And as we all know, coal mining is on its way out. So our businesses are having to make massive shifts. We've got whole industries that are basically connected to that. That's, they're either supplying the mines or supplying the people for the mines. So we actually have a lot of knowledge there. And I think it's in areas around the globe where these sorts of shifts are happening, taking that knowledge, that sort of engineering, manufacturing knowledge, which has been directed at one thing for so long, and sort of showing them, hey, you can sort of turn this around and go in a different direction. But also we find that there's a lot of motivation there for those businesses that are in that situation, but we've got plenty of smaller guys that are not involved in that space and trying to, they're obviously a bit less motivated. So I think that fact of like engaging with them directly, as Alana was talking about, like having that person directly sort of go talk to them, match them up with each other, particularly around that circular economy aspect. We sort of have recognized, we can do as much sort of try to do as much data collection as we can, but in reality, what you do need to do is get out there and talk directly to those businesses and find out what are they doing, what are their needs, and then that end bit of which I think a lot of governments have been really good at collecting the data, over time of what businesses they have and maybe what they need. Not so much now. Now we're all moving circular economy sort of stuff. We're like now trying to understand what they make and what they need for that process and what are their waste products. But then that last step of connecting them together, I think, really, really important.
I'm curious if anyone in the room has any experience with more like traditional or industrial manufacturing. So one of the observations I often have when traveling is that there's a pretty significant disconnect between like the way that people learn how to prototype stuff in a makerspace and the way that most things are actually made. And I sometimes feel like I don't know a ton about it, but spent some time like in manufacturing centers to try to learn. But sometimes I wish some more people that might expertise in that area were participating in this sort of conversation. But maybe they're here now.
I'm glad you brought it up because I think production on a million-dollar scale, million pieces scale is totally different from doing one and two.
Well, it doesn't have to be even millions, but even at 100 or 1,000, it starts to become quite different.
We have Greg, kind of an expert in the field. How do you think we can, even as makerspaces or informal places of learning, how could we better support mass manufacturing or the larger scale manufacturing that Leo was talking about? Clearly the software is helpful.
Right. Well, I'll take it from not the billion piece order, but kind of a personal point of view. My father had a die casting company in Cleveland, and so that's much smaller, and that's going from prototyping, you're just trying to get something out there as fast as possible. Manufacturing is most often, how cheap can I make it? Mm-hmm. And there is, in many cases, a disconnect there. So it's, in many ways, it's that both sides need to understand what is happening with the prototyping stage and the manufacturing stage. And there is still that kind of disconnect where the people who are doing manufacturing are not going to spend the time to understand how can I just make one of these. And the people who are prototyping, in many cases, are saying, all I care about is product market fit. I'm not necessarily thinking about down the road on my cost, because if nobody wants my product, it doesn't matter. So, one of the things that keeps coming through my mind here in this discussion is that, at least personally for me, it all comes down to, is it a viable business? And, there's a lot of people don't necessarily know how to build a business. They know how to build a product. And it's something that they can do, but how do they build a business? And I think that's, to me, that's the disconnect of Fab Labs, makerspaces, prototyping, and manufacturing is, one is a product, one is a business. And there's, we need to make that connection.
I think that disconnect is really important to solve, because as we talk about Fab Cities, we can't be making millions of one thing in one place and distributing it internationally.
but we also need to be able to get things out quickly that people are willing to use in their own home and willing to purchase. Because, we've been talking about kind of one half of the puzzle with, how does the local government help these businesses thrive, and how to help keep them in their storefront. But the other half is, how do you get people to actually, support these businesses? And there's a small startup called Amazon that's been, like, people are very tied to, getting things as soon as possible, and they're very used to that convenience and being able to just click something on their phone. So it's there needs to be a big paradigm shift for that to happen, and solving that, finding that middle ground, getting those two halves to talk to each other, where high quality products can be made locally, affordably, and then that design can be distributed, and that can be made on a smaller scale, like, in a distributed fashion. That needs to be solved, and I think what Kate was talking about kind of ties into that with the Fab City OS, and making this concept, clearly explaining it to people who have no interest in fabricating, just want to buy a coat rack or whatever it is, make that approachable and understandable, and let them not have to worry about, obviously a big tie of it is, understanding the people who are making it and having that, that connection to the local community. But we care about that. A lot of people don't give a crap about that. They just want it as cheap as possible and as quickly as possible. And so how do you get those people? How do you shift that fulcrum to get people okay with, either getting something as fast as possible, and it might be a bit more expensive, or, so it's a big question.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Etsy solves that problem, right? It's more expensive, it's mostly handmade, and Amazon have not killed it completely yet.
No, but it's not necessarily local either.
No.
Yeah, I think, I was thinking about this earlier, because in a lot of the kind of urban planning or zoning work that we do, we always look for like existing power grids to plug into, to try and start to kind of affect change when you're trying to create authentic places or kind of build up a community. And I'm thinking, like, on Amazon, if it just defaulted to the locally manufactured option rather than defaulted to Prime, wouldn't that be, okay, we win? Like, that's because if you could buy something that's made up the street as the default rather than getting shipped in overseas, that's sort of, because I think part of the struggle I've been trying to wrap my head around is how do you more quickly create economies so that those local makers and fabricators have a place to sell and be supported. And and I think that gets into the real estate side of it too. It's like, well, where are they doing this, and is that at the right price point to make that possible?
Has anybody bought anything from the grommet? Do we know what the grommet is? What's the grommet? I mean, it's a good example.
Well, the grommet is a company based in Somerville, so I didn't know they existed until I started working in Somerville. But they buy or they coordinate a sales platform for local makers. And so you can buy stuff through the grommet. They've now sold the business, the grommet, to Ace Hardware, or the same parent company as Ace Hardware. So now there's this online platform to buy locally made goods, but also, and to market these goods, but also now that they have, if you go to any Ace Hardware, there's going to be an end cap somewhere that says the grommet, and it lists probably, it has on display their best sellers. So it's turned into quite a thing.
That is so cool. I hate to do this because this is a wonderful conversation, but I want to respect everyone's time. We're already 15 minutes over, and so I want to ask the question: is this conversation? Do we want to continue this conversation? Do we want to continue this work? It seems to me that we have potentially an opportunity through the ARPA funds that we talked about before to pursue something and to fund something. But is this? Do we think we can together as a community, kind of pull together some capacity around this to move forward? Or is there the interest around this to move forward? I guess
We have a yes exclamation point from Tammy. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you, Tammy. Do we, what do you guys think? Do you want to continue the conversation?
I'm very interested. I mean, I have to leave.
I know.
Not today. Not today, to be clear.
Yeah, to be clear, not today. This is just for the future. What do you say? Yeah?
Yeah, no, I think it's.
Do you feel the same?
Well, I don't want to be a naysayer, and I wasn't going to say anything, but since you addressed me personally, I'm going to say what is on my mind, like it or not. I can't connect, and I just use the word millions, just not to argue over the numbers, but even if you're making something in dozens, I can't imagine, and I'm not a manufacturer, so maybe somebody who understands manufacturing better can tell me, but I can't imagine being able to be anywhere competitive on price. It's like, you know, knit socks for the babies, they're never going to cost the same as the ones you go and buy in a store, or sweater, or whatever. The human labor is just so extraordinarily expensive, especially in this country, that any kind of large or even medium, you know, when you're not making onesies, it's so not competitive in price that I can't envision it. Now, said it all, as I myself said it earlier, Etsy exists, and there are things that, you know, they made that I'm sure are much more expensive than, but will Etsy be as successful as Amazon ever?
But I think the goal is to leverage digital fabrication and to use, you know, designs that can be created in one place on a scale of 1,000 products, you know, with zoning and with, you know, government help, being able to have a small factory that can create enough for Boston and replicate that elsewhere. So rather than just having fully human labor, we can use digital manufacturing and take the success from one place and replicate that elsewhere, but keep the, you know, the local economy strong at each place.
Well, then let's, if I could we bring it back to your question? Because I think we could sort of like really dive into this for half a day, if not 2 weeks. What would you like? I think yes, some number of us would.
Well, so maybe the next step is just to reach out to you all maybe in a month and see if we can reconvene, if there's anybody in particular that we might want to invite because we wanted to hear their voices, like what Kate was suggesting.
Maybe somebody from that company that.
Or from Gromit, yeah, exactly, yeah. Okay, well, so, I mean, that's, for me, I really do feel like we have an opportunity right now, funding-wise, to go after a few things potentially that we think would really push us forward, but we don't really, we've got some thoughts, but we don't really have any concrete ideas about how to move forward, but maybe that's the next conversation. So.
And Shayna, do you want to jump in really quick with your last comment there? I think that's really interesting and very concrete and fab.
Oh, just the latest one? Yeah, I mean, thinking about concrete steps, because this has been in my imagination for so long, I guess, you know, can we find one forward-leaning school district open to reimagining the local economy? Rick Smyer of Communities of the Future may have coined the term communiversity. I heard that years ago and love the image it evokes. You know, when you think about transcending the barriers that are currently in place, whether they're geographic barriers, technological barriers, you know, mobility barriers, how do we think about all of the resources, you know, that are somewhat proximate, let's say regional, and start with a school district, a hub, and I actually would suggest that Holyoke is ripe for this, to begin to totally reimagine how we'd reconfigure the community and begin to incubate these kinds of things, all these ideas, and bring them proximate into one locale where we could start to show what's possible has really been on my heart, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, great, Fabville.
I recommend maybe that we sort of like try to create some space, and you guys are very good at identifying spaces, platforms, whatever, to sort of build an agenda collaboratively for some follow-up conversation in this area with the goal of articulating how might we want to make an initial investment in this activity, whether it's research, capacity building, grants for small manufacturers, whatever, between now and, say, the end of the year or something. We should come up with like some kind of timeline here where we can have that follow-up meeting to keep the momentum going and feed the network would be the way I would put it.
Okay. Sound good?
If I could just add too, I think that just to mention, I guess in this context real quick, the other reason why Holyoke is so compelling to me, just having gotten to know the creative district there and the whole landscape as a city awaiting a reemergence and a reimagination, a renaissance, is the mass green high-powered computing centers right there in Holyoke also, which is a tremendous asset to the work ahead to me. So I'll share that, I guess, as another thought to kind of toss into the mix, but why it's so compelling to me and feels so right.
I just want to say one more thing, if you don't mind. And that's one of the reasons I'm interested in hearing from the G company is, you know, Massachusetts is a great place for many, many things. You know, educate, blah, 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 blah. Cheap rent is not one of those things. So I can't, again, maybe I'm too close-minded, but I can't imagine how we could possibly compete on a manufacturing level. Maybe we need to make prototypes here, and then, you know, somewhere where, I don't know where the cheapest rent in the United States, Arkansas or something, is where they do even the minimal manufacturing, not in millions, but dozens.
Okay. One way of thinking about that is like, the objective is not necessarily the production of the product, but is it possible to support the person making it? So like the real objective is to support that sort of livelihood in the area, which might be more tractable than.
But how do you support it if it's so much cheaper elsewhere? I mean, this is why all of the manufacturers are moving overseas because it's so much cheaper. One reason and one reason only.
Part of the problem is that the cost of some things isn't real, right? So those things are so cheap, they're that cheap because that's not the real price of them, right? There's an environmental cost to those things that isn't being calculated for or being paid for by anyone. And so I think that this would also be an interesting way to lead into policy, right? Like, should we start should cities start looking at